Hello friends, let's talk about what's happening in Ukrainian-Polish relations. Kaczyński is returning awards and demanding to block Ukraine's accession to the EU. Budanov predicts that this is just the beginning, and we'll discuss why Tusk and PIS are united in putting pressure on Kyiv and how the historical scandal will affect Ukrainians in Poland. We'll cover all the hidden motives in this video. Watch until the end and please like and subscribe. Thanks to everyone supporting us. Take a moment to like and support Aerodynamics. It's important. Well, let's get down to business. Yes, hit the bell as well. Part 1. For your convenience, there will be timestamps. Let's talk about the flood of awards, let's call it that. The Polish elections, the Mussolini effect. Let's start with the facade that's currently on fire. This scandal isn't dying down in the media space. On the surface, it all looks like a soap opera, right? Former Ukrainian presidents are demonstratively returning Polish awards. In response, Polish politicians are also staging a mirrored flood of awards. The legendary Yaroslav Kaczyński stood out especially brightly. He's a real heavyweight. Those who know boxing will get it. In Polish politics, he's the leader of the largest party, Law and Justice. And he, to put it mildly, threw back the order of Yaroslav the Wise and declared that Warsaw must block negotiations on Ukraine's accession to the European Union. At the forefront of this attack is Nawrocki, the former head of the Polish Institute of National Remembrance. In other words, a person who is professionally trained for battles on the historical front. Of course, out in the field, taxi drivers and all sorts of not-so-adequate characters say that this person is just some kind of boxer, a gigolo, and not a very smart or far-sighted person. Of course, we don't believe them because Poland is very lucky with its president. In Italy, everyone asks me, when Karl Nawrocki finishes his career as president of Poland, can he come to Italy and be our president instead of, excuse me, that old fart Sergio Mattarelli? I say, of course he can. Write him a letter. They say, you are very lucky, dear Poles, with your president very lucky. Sorry, I got distracted and couldn't help myself. The head of Ukrainian military intelligence, Kyrylo Budanov, enters the game. His comment is simply a masterpiece of diplomatic trolling and probably at the same time a sign of a tough standoff with the Poles. Budanov calls what is happening a terrible mistake, but pay attention to his actions and words. He says it's a mistake solely on the part of Warsaw. He directly speaks about the immaturity of people in Poland, who pushed for and made such a decision. He calls it poorly thought out and adds such a brilliant jab. If they were going to do such things, then Mussolini should have been stripped of this order, because this looks extremely strange. Write in the comments whether it was right that Zelensky had his order taken away, that the Ukrainian people had this order taken away, but Mussolini didn't. What does this mean? The head of the GUAR, the former head of the GUAR, yes, is basically voicing the official, well, deeply rooted position of Kyiv. The Ukrainian side doesn't consider itself guilty in the slightest. Renaming a unit in honor of a UPA figure, from Kyiv's point of view, is our own sovereign internal affair. Comment if you agree or not, or should we ask the Poles for permission? So, Warsaw's reaction, according to Budanov, is infantilism and political immaturity. Budanov emphasizes that this is not yet a conflict, but a contradiction. But right away, Marachny gives a forecast. It's not the peak yet, it will come later. If everything continues as it is, and judging by the dynamics, no one is going to stop. For Kaczyński, Nawrocki, and the entire PiS-PiStak party, the reaction from Kyiv is pure fuel for the electoral machine. They skillfully shift the agenda to the field of historical memory, but that's where they feel confident. Yes, they have a certain position. And by the way, the opposition understands that the Liberal Prime Minister Donald Tusk, who is bound by commitments to Brussels, cannot afford to attack Ukrainians that radically. Tusk must maneuver, choose his words carefully, and try to put out the fire. Because of this, PiS appears in the eyes of the conservative Polish voter as the only defenders of our national honor. And all these liberals, sorry for the expression, they're just honestly not even Poles. They shouldn't even have a passport. Ugh, it's disgusting to be like that. All right, let's move on to the second part. Competition for leadership, right? Why are Tusk and PiS united on the main issue, reducing everything to a banal election race? The immaturity of certain Polish gentlemen. That means not seeing the whole picture. The current conflict around historical memory is just a convenient excuse, because beneath the surface, there's a harsh reality. We've talked about it in detail. There was a 15-minute video on the economy. To sum up briefly, it will only take 2 minutes. Watch the timestamps and skip any parts you don't want. The truth is, within a unified European space, Ukraine and Poland are not lifelong brothers, but direct, tough main competitors. Until now, Poland has single-handedly stood alone as the main regional leader in the eastern part of the European Union. It was Warsaw that was the key hub, the main recipient of European subsidies, and the top player in the region in the eyes of Washington. Kyiv is now making it clear that playing the younger brother no longer interests us. Ukraine is forging direct ties with Western Europe's heavyweights, Germany, France, and the UK, bypassing Warsaw, and it's working well. And Tusk has already publicly expressed his deep indignation that strategic decisions about the region are being made. This trio, which is supposedly far from the region, is making all these decisions without Poland's involvement. He firmly demanded that Warsaw be included in the process, like we're not just sitting on the sidelines here either. There you go. And you see, here's the difference between Tusk and PS, right? For them, it's all about style. But the essence is the same, to protect Poland's national economic interests. By the way, I'm saying this without sarcasm. The Peace Party, Nawrocki, will pressure Ukraine at the negotiations with all sorts of historical grievances, demanding repentance for Volyn and exhumations. And go ahead, rename all your streets, all your squares, all your OWN units. Oh, OWN. I meant AFU. That was a slip of the tongue, right? Rename everything. Tusk's party will act more subtly in a Brussels way. They will strictly protect their farmers and truckers, impose endless quotas, environmental standards, and demand anti-corruption measures. And the result in both cases will be identical: maximum slowdown of Ukraine's integration into the EU and imposing on Kyiv such accession conditions that will, at least in the short term, severely weaken Ukraine's position in the European market. In other words, Poland, to put it simply, won't just let competitors into its backyard. Now we move to the third part of the video, focusing on ordinary workers. What awaits Ukrainians in Poland? Let's come down from all this big picture geopolitics to the real world and see how Budanov's forecast about what will happen next will affect the millions of Ukrainian citizens who live, work, or are on welfare in Poland. I'll tell you straight, it's going to affect them very badly. Even now, this is already coming up regularly. In other words, these scandals don't go unnoticed by the average Pole, because sociologists are already recording a steady and rapid rise in anti-Ukrainian sentiment in Polish society. Everyday empathy of 2022? They've already forgotten about it. It's completely run out. It's being replaced by irritation, fatigue, suspicion, and of course some parties are adding fuel to the fire. You know which ones. Neither Tusk nor anyone else can ignore these moods. That is, you can't forget about your ratings. War is war, but you still have to watch your poll numbers. What should Ukrainians in Poland expect soon? First, completely tightened migration control and legalization. That is, when residence cards were still being issued there under simplified procedures, let's call it that, regardless of the time frames, all of that is becoming a thing of the past. Now, they've already switched to an Italian strike mode, in my opinion, because they're handing out refusals for no reason. Maybe I'm wrong, that's just what my sources say. The review of documents for residence permits and permanent residency is already being delayed for years. Every certificate, every employment contract is being scrutinized under a magnifying glass. Moreover, with Denmark's statements and the European Commission's proposals to limit protection for conscription-age men, I think Poland will fully embrace this idea. Warsaw will gladly start tightening the screws for newly arrived men, of course, those aged 23 to 60. Issuing them new documents or extending the old ones will become quite a huge problem. Well, maybe some fixers who know the laws will make good money on this. And of course, most people will simply be turned away. Next, tightening the labor market. Polish labor unions and local businesses facing Europe's economic crisis will push for domestic market protection, and they're already demanding it. What does this Żabka lady think she's doing? We'll talk about this scandal later. She claims Ukrainians are a priority, right? That's quite an idea. Poles all want to work at Żabka. We'll discuss this separately. What does this mean for Ukrainians? A gradual narrowing of opportunities for legal employment in qualified and well-paid positions. As always, priority will be given to Polish citizens. The grey sector of the economy, of course, will remain, but I have never recommended working off the books because it deprives people of health insurance, social protections, and puts them completely at the mercy of the employer's mood, and whims as well. Third point, this is the most important in my view: domestic pressure and social alienation. When accusations of immaturity and ingratitude come from every Polish iron, it inevitably projects onto everyday life. Ukrainians in Poland have already faced a rise in everyday nationalism. This is evident in the difficulties of renting housing, as Poles are increasingly reluctant to rent apartments to foreigners. Conflicts at work. Anatoly, hello to you. Yes, you wrote to me and told me about your case, that for the first time in 7 years you heard. You, Perdolier, yes, you're taking our bread away. In schools where Ukrainian children study, The atmosphere of a warm welcome in 2022 has completely changed to the attitude of, you are guests here and we didn't invite any guests. Sorry, but that's just how it is. That's life's harsh truth. Fourth point, cutting social programs. Any payments, benefits, or allowances for children, 800, for Ukrainian refugees will be cut as much as possible under the pretext of budget savings and restoring justice, in quotes. The Polish taxpayer says, we've already paid for 4 years of luxurious locations in Poland for you. And here you are saying that you Ukrainians and Budanovs and everyone else are saying that the decisions of our politicians are not immature. Well, friends, in front of us is, if you look at it this way, a classic lesson in real politics. History turned out to be buried in the archives, and at the right moment, it is brought to light and turned into an effective tool of pressure. Poland and Ukraine have entered a phase of a long, grinding standoff over resources and influence within Europe. Moreover, as Budanov rightly noted, what we are seeing now is not even the peak, but just a warm-up before the real storm. Warsaw will use its entire arsenal, from historical grievances to bureaucratic obstacles at the border and beyond, not just for ordinary people, and all sorts of truck drivers will be affected. The main hostages of this situation, unfortunately, are millions of ordinary Ukrainian citizens in Poland, and there are about 1.5 million of them. They will have to experience firsthand how the romantic period is replaced by harsh, cold, and cynical pragmatism. Any concessions, if there were any, will no longer exist. The time of harsh struggle for survival in a foreign and rapidly cooling ecosystem is coming. But that's the reality, my friends, like it or not. Write in the comments, maybe I'm wrong and all of this is nonsense, and the Poles are actually the coolest guys who love Ukrainians so much they can't even eat. So, thank you very much for your attention. Thank you for liking and commenting. Let me remind you that the best money transfer service is Transfer Google. The link is in the description. Send money to your family and loved ones. Support them whenever you can. Friends? For those watching so far, comment where you're watching from. Dennis watched from Turkey, others from Turkmenistan and Tajikistan. What other countries starting with T does Nambukute know? I can't recall. Trinidad and Tobago, yes. Share where you're watching from, it's important. Greetings to the working class, truck drivers, machinists, and all eyebrow mechanics. Proletariat, as they say, from our table to yours. That's all for now. Until next time.